Hi, Brody. I heard from your dad that the books I ordered for you arrived in the mail, and so I thought I would change the plan for today and read the first story out of Peter Rabbit instead of another Winnie the Pooh. We'll get back to Winnie the Pooh, but let's try and see what's going on with Peter Rabbit. The stories here were written by someone named Beatrix Potter. And you know me, we always have to read who wrote it and what else? Who illustrated it. And Beatrix Potter is the illustrator also. She was very talented. Okay, let's see. Got Snodgrass ready, and Dr. Leo, and Duck, and here's the first picture in my book. Peter Rabbit, my book looks a little bit bigger than yours because it's probably a little different from yours because it's bigger. But it's still got the same pictures. They're just arranged differently on the pages. Okay, the first story is The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And here he is, not looking too happy, hiding from something that's in a teacup. I wonder what that's about. Maybe we're going to find out. Okay. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. It was a tree that would go way up, wouldn't it? And there they are, peeking out. Now, my dears, said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Oh, I don't think being in a pie sounds like a good idea for a rabbit. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out. Then Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. Okay, did they go to Mr. McGregor's garden? No, they didn't. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. That's a pretty tight squeeze, wasn't it? First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. Turn the page. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages. But he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Pretty good runner. Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not, unfortunately, run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large button on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Uh-oh. Do you think Mrs. Rabbit is going to be happy about that? She told him about accidents in Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were heard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. That means they just begged him to try even harder. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. Can you see him there, looking for Peter? He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed. Achoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, big foot, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all round. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath, not like the gate. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was sitting there, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. We haven't met Benjamin yet, have we? He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. It's way back there. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him in the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped under the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. You know what a fortnight is? We don't use that word very much anymore, but it means about 2 weeks. It was about 2 weeks since Peter last lost his jacket. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. That's because they spent the day picking those blackberries, isn't it? And now, if you look back at the beginning picture, we find out it was kind of a clue about what was going to happen to Peter Rabbit. He wound up in bed, not feeling good, having a cup of chamomile tea, or at least some teaspoons from it. That's the end of the tale of Peter Rabbit. And next time that we read this book, we'll read the tale of Benjamin Bunny. We'll find out who he is. Okay. I like reading the stories to you. Good night, Brody.